Start again. Okay. So again, welcome to our third in our World Series Shiriman Talks, designed to promote thoughtful, engaging and enlightening ideas in our modern Jewish world. Firstly, thank you for joining us in the event. We very much appreciate it and hope that you'll get a lot out of the event. Over the 5 weeks of July, speakers will be coming to you live via Zoom from across the globe with international content, hence the World Series. I'll speak a little more about the future events at the end of this talk. Some housekeeping rules to begin with, in order to make sure the programme runs smoothly and everyone can enjoy the session as much as possible. Everyone is muted and should stay muted throughout the whole session, please. If you have any questions at any point throughout the whole talk, please use the chat function on Zoom and you'll be able to message myself as the host. At the end of the talk, I will then ask as many questions as possible on your behalf. There'll be a window of 10 to 20 minutes to do this. Tonight, I'm delighted to announce that we're jumping across Europe over to Ramat HaSharon near Tel Aviv with Col Miri Eisin, who is a retired colonel, one of only 2% of women who reached the rank of colonel in the entire history of the IDF. In 2006, Miri became the foreign media advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert as the first woman to serve in this position, starting just as the Second Lebanon War broke out. As a graduate of political science and Middle Eastern studies from Tel Aviv University, Miri is best placed to guide us through the challenges faced in the Middle East. Miri will be speaking tonight about the Middle East in pandemic times. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Miri. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. So the rules of the game are also, I'm in Tel Aviv. I hope that the internet will work well. I hope we won't have problems, but we smile and we understand it's a little different because of that. What I want to talk with all of you tonight, sitting here next to Tel Aviv, is to talk with you about the challenges of the Middle East in the pandemic times. Some of the challenges you're familiar with, but these challenges have been much focused and become more extreme in the pandemic. And I want to take you through a few of them that I feel are not as well known. And to do so, I'm going to try, as we say in our technological world, to do a bit more. And I'm going to try and share screen. And I hope that I have right now. Just somebody put a finger up if you're actually, whoops, that's not the right one. Are you seeing it right now? You're seeing the screen right now, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great. And are you seeing just the slide or are you seeing my whole screen?
It's just the slide.
Excellent. Okay. It's called technology, even I, as I sit aside. So I'm looking at the Middle East, but I want to first of all frame what we're talking about. Nowadays, we should be talking about Middle East and North Africa, MENA, the MENA countries. I'm talking about countries from Morocco all the way to Iran. Nowadays, some people even stretch that out towards Afghanistan and Pakistan. It has implications when we're talking about the challenges for Israel within our arena. I want to remind you quickly of where we are. I know it's mid-July. Yesterday was Bastille Day in France. Here we are in mid-July. And think about where we are in that sense. Is the first aspect is that here in Israel, we are sitting within the borders to the north, Lebanon and Syria, to the east, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, to the south, the long border with Egypt. On the one hand, we're talking about borders of peace, Jordan and Egypt. On the other hand, we're talking about Hezbollah, let alone Syria, and the events that have been happening there. Those are in our immediate borders, but I want you to start thinking about those as our outer borders. We also have two not as well defined inner borders. The first is with the Gaza Strip. It's similar to an outer one, outer inner border. And the second is, of course, the border with Judea and Samaria, with the West Bank, and I'll be talking about that a bit later when I get to the issue of annexation and what that's brought up. So here we are within the Middle East. It's July right now, and every once in a while I do this for myself, I become amused. I have a very odd sense of humor, and I want to remind you that the event of the taking out, the killing, the assassination, call it whatever you want, of Qasem Soleimani happened January 3rd, just 6 months ago. And that was a major event that happened in the Middle East before anybody really knew about COVID-19. COVID-19, even though that was creeping up behind. Just a few weeks after the taking out of Qasem Soleimani, the commander then of the Al-Quds force, which I will talk about a little bit later, we had a big event in Washington, D.C. The Israeli prime minister and the head of the opposition at the time, now the Israeli minister of defense, but the prime minister was at the event of the unveiling, again, depends what term you want to use, of the peace plan, or as we like to call it in that sense, the deal of the century. And I say that in that sense that all of us, as we're looking at that right now, well, right now I'm like at that stage where I'm not seeing anything on my, okay, here I'm seeing something on my screen, that when we look at the deal of the century, as I'm going to be talking about it in a few minutes, it has implications that are happening right now and are also impacted by the virus. And not only that, in March, we had our elections. And when I say the Israeli elections, we're living right now the results of those elections, that new government that has been put together, where we have prime minister and then we have alternate prime minister who's also the minister of defense. We have different parties who have joined. All of those happened in its own way before any of us understood what the world was changing in the new pandemic world. So I have data here. It doesn't matter the data. Don't try to look at it. It's just those enormous numbers of literally 500,000 people dead already, the millions of people who have been infected. None of us understand that. I'm certainly not a doctor. I'm not going to talk about the pandemic from the health aspect, but I want to talk about the Middle East of 2020 in the pandemic age. And to do so, I want to introduce you to the Middle East a minute before the pandemic, but it continues to be during the pandemic. And these are issues that are very relevant to understanding the challenges of our arena in these times. And element number one has to do with demographics or numbers. Look for a moment for those who can see. I'm showing right now a map of a portion of the Middle East. And in that portion, I'm showing several of the countries of the Middle East, but I'm showing what are essentially 3 of the largest, or more correctly, most populated countries of the Middle East. And those 3 are Egypt, Iran, and Turkey. And as you look at the big numbers that we're seeing on the map as they're spread out, I'm going to show it in a slightly different focus. And in that slightly different focus, what you're seeing right now is that Egypt, over 100 million people, Turkey and Iran, both in and around 85 million people. Now, I want to put that out there with enormous respect to the United Kingdom, to Great Britain. You guys are less than 80 million, okay? Germany is around 80 million. But the countries that we're looking at right now, if Turkey and Iran are each 85 million, Egypt, over 100 million, are drastically different from, let's say, Germany and the UK, the 2 most populated countries in Europe. I can't call it the EU anymore, but in Europe. And why am I emphasizing that it's drastically different? Because in the Middle East and North Africa, half the population is under the age of 25. I want to be clear about what I just said. 100 million Egyptians, 50 million under the age of 25, 85 million Turks or Iranians in each one of the country, 42 million people under the age of 25. Now, these kind of numbers are very impactful on how you develop a country, where you invest, when you build schools, when you have to create new jobs, because the parents of the 25-year-olds, let alone the 10-year-olds who will be 25 in another 15 years, are going to work until they're 60, until they're 70, maybe until they're 80, which means that it isn't that generational shift of people going out to pension and the younger generation coming in. Just on the BBC website today is a new research of, I'm blanking on who, I noticed it before, that the entire Western world is going to start going into a huge decline in demographics. You're going to have more 80-year-olds than you are 10-year-olds. But I'm looking right now at the Middle East and North Africa. They're in a different place. This impact is a generational one. In what way is it a generational one? If you take again Egypt as an example, 100 million people, Turkey or Iran as examples, you look again and you see now issues of literacy. For those who can, and as you're looking at these maps that I'm showing you, Middle East, demographics of countries that have very large countries, but the impact is because they have an enormous youth population. But here I'm showing you literacy numbers. Why don't we talk about, again, Great Britain or Israel, where I'm sitting right now? Some things I think that all of us take for granted, Baruch Hashem, we all take it for granted. Literacy? Who talks about illiteracy today? But if you look at the Middle East and North Africa, the older generations, not the 80-year-olds, not even the 60-year-olds, but the over 40, over 45, in this case, they're showing it as the gap is from 65 and over, had enormous illiteracy rates. A country like Egypt, 65% illiteracy. It's just numbers that are hard to think of, but you look and go, wow, it's different. All of those numbers are much better. Now, that's true, but I want you to look at it a second time, because in Egypt, literacy nowadays for the younger generation is in and around 90%. And you go, that's so wonderful. It went up from like 35% to 90%. And you're right, that's good news. But it still means that in the younger generation, you still have 10% that are illiterate, let alone the gap between the older generation. You have to create new types of jobs. You have to change the way you are. And as I'm sitting here in front of my computer, we're talking on Zoom. I'm talking to you from Ramat HaShalom next to Tel Aviv. And all of us have this right next to us, right? Okay, you have your little cell phones next to you and it's bothering you or not bothering you. And this enormous youth, which is literate way more than the parents, let alone the grandparents, also have this little thing right next to them. Or they are watching, and through the internet, the flow of information has changed so dramatically over the last 15, 20 years. And I give you that as a challenge that all of us need to be aware of. The Middle East and North Africa are young. They are literate. They know what's going on. They don't want to be like the United Kingdom. They don't want to be like France or like Germany. They don't see not the United States, and for that matter, not Russia, as the model that they want to be like. They want to invent themselves in a different way. And these are challenges that have been following us for the last decade, that we look at them through eyes of Western liberal ideas, and they're not looking at them not through Western eyes, not through liberal eyes. They are inventing their own future, and portions of that future, as I'll show in a few moments, are very scary. Not all of them, but they're not going to be the same as we are. If I go on with my numbers, the challenge of the pandemic, but it's a challenge that was before the pandemic, is the enormous youth, which is much more literate than its parents. And wonderful people, members of your shoal, they are overwhelmingly, I shouldn't say this with a smile, it's just me and my cynicism, that they are overwhelmingly unemployed. Can you imagine what that combination does? We have it on a very small level in areas of Europe of today and in the UK, where you get a disenfranchised, relatively well-learned youth who become both disenfranchised because they don't have jobs, they don't feel like they belong, they don't feel like their leaders represent them, they don't feel like they have a future. And when you talk about the pandemic, you're taking unemployment numbers that were enormous before the pandemic, and you're making them that much higher. So I know I've talked about this quite a bit, but I feel it's an important aspect that we're not aware of, because it isn't something that's far away from us, Israel. the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I'll give you the Gaza Strip as an example right now. The Gaza Strip as an area in 1994, when Israel transferred the Gaza Strip. Can you guys hear me okay? Because my computer said that I have, okay. Sometimes it tells me that I have internet problems, so I want to be sure I'm not talking to myself. That in the Gaza Strip in 1994, the Gaza Strip, when Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization jointly established the first stage of the Palestinian Authority, the Gaza Strip in numbers was 1 million Palestinian inhabitants. And we're in 2020, and they passed 2 million. That's 1 million people under the age of 26. When you talk about the challenges, even before Hamas took over 13 years ago in 2007, let alone in the last 13 years of Hamas rule, it's not just about Hamas, Islamic extremism, jihadism to a certain extent, even though that isn't specifically what Hamas is about. But when you talk about these challenges, I want us to be aware that it also has to do with enormous youth who have no future, who most of them probably don't feel that Hamas certainly doesn't represent them. It's not a representative type of government, governance, and these are challenges throughout the Middle East and North Africa. I've harped on this issue a lot. I'm going to change a bit into a second issue. And the second issue that I want to talk about is religiosity in the Middle East and North Africa. And if I started with a photograph of the Western Wall with men praying right now with their masks, if we think just for ourselves of what we went through here in Israel or in the UK to get through Purim, where in Israel that became the mass everybody getting the illness. That's what happened in Israel. It was a very bad occasion for us. Learning from Purim, Passover, Pesach, not meeting anybody for Pesach, not having the family occasion for Pesach, going on into the week of Chol Hamoed and Pesach Sheni, and then in Israel, Yom HaAtzmaut, and then where there was a lockdown as there was for so long. And now, there's a religious aspect to this, and there's a communal aspect to this, and there's a family aspect to this. But I live in the Middle East with enormous respect to Israel, 9 million citizens, to the Jews in the world. I think today we're edging 14 million Jews in the world, maybe 15 million Jews in the world. We're aware of that, right? In the world today, there are 2.2 billion Christians, and they have been heavily impacted by the pandemic, including the aspect of things inside the Holy Land. If it's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, A, being closed, B, Easter, really it's been affecting all over. But I live in an area which overwhelmingly has the 2.2 billion Muslims in the world. Now, there are Muslims in the UK, there are Muslims worldwide. I want to put this again on the same page where when we talk about the Middle East and North Africa, when I talk about these enormous demographics, I want to remind us all that the 5 largest Muslim demographics in the world, meaning the 5 most populated Muslim countries, not one is in the Middle East. The 5 largest Muslim populated countries are Indonesia, and then the 3, if I call it the British Raj, but the 3 formerly under Great Britain, which are Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, that each one of them have around 200 million Muslims. Indonesia has around 220. Rabbi, I'm hearing somebody. I have a feeling somebody's not on mute. Just check me out who that is. That's just me who hears that. And then, not Rabbi Hale. And then in addition, the 5th largest country is Nigeria. And I give you that because as you look at that, Islam is an important part. And just like we have to think as Jews about what we do with Passover or Shavuot, or for that matter, in a few weeks' time, the prayer of Eicha, of Tisha B'Av, which is usually done with thousands of people in and around the Western Wall, if not tens of thousands of people. They're not going to allow people there. that's changing our religious, not just habits, our rituals. And I bring you into the Muslim world because throughout the Middle East, overwhelmingly, we're talking about Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, the different countries have different numbers. I want to talk about it within the pandemic. Element number one, there was the month of Ramadan. So try and just think about the fact that just like for us, for me, I'm sitting at my dining room table right now, which opens up into an enormous, 24-seat table, because that's what you're supposed to be able to do on Friday nights. I mean, here at Erev Shabbat, and the way that we do that, and at Pesach, and here in Israel, they're already starting to talk about the fact that they're not going to let us get together for Rosh Hashanah. So that's me, the Jew. But in the Middle East and North Africa, they went through the 30 days of the month of Ramadan without doing that main aspect of Ramadan, not the fasting, the break fasting, the iftar. Yes, it's a month of commitment. It's a different idea. And that has been an enormous impact throughout the Middle East and North Africa. And then you get to what it does in an immediate effect, where they closed off the entire complex of the Al-Aqsa complex, as they'll call it in Arabic, the Dome of the Rock, or the Temple Mount for all of us, cleaning out the different mosques as we go on. But I want to remind you, in geopolitics, Israel is sovereign in the city of Jerusalem. The Muslim Authority, the name is Waqf, are the ones who closed the entire Temple Mount compound, the Al-Aqsa compound, because of the illness. But who is standing at the gate to tell you you're not allowed in? Not the Waqf, the Israeli police officer. And these are challenges that we have here and we've had over the last few weeks with the reopening. It's just been closed again, by the way. I mean, we're going into a very harsh second wave. But then you get, the National Health Service, stay at home, protect yourself, and I'm not saying it's easier here or there. You have a Muslim population inside the UK, which is significant also. But I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the fact that at the end of next week, no, it's the end of, I have to look on my calendar, it's at the end of July, it's in another 2 weeks. The 29th, 30, 31st of July, they never know the exact date, is supposed to be the annual Hajj, the annual pilgrimage, which it's an event. And again, inside Islam, they only have 5 pillars. And one of the pillars is that once in your lifetime, you go and do the Hajj. And ladies and gentlemen, in the UK, they canceled the Hajj. They're not doing the Hajj this year. The health and safety of Muslims is our priority. And Saudi Arabia announced, for the first time ever in that sense, that they are canceling the Hajj because of the pandemic. This has implications for people who want to do the most religious aspects. So in a rude way, I don't mean it to be rude. I'm putting the religion aspect aside, and I shouldn't put the religious aspect aside. But think about it now in geopolitics. So when Saudi Arabia tells all of the different Muslim countries, your Muslims can't come, we're closing off the holy sites, but they're going to allow in 1,000 Sauds. Do you think that the Iranian Shiites are going to get mad that the Saudis can go, but they can't go? What does it do to the relations and the geopolitics between countries when Saudi Arabia, who is the holder and keeper of the holy sites, closes it off to everybody else? So what they're doing, as far as they're concerned, I'll go back one on to show you, is that they've closed it off to everybody. Having said that, they have a webcam that works 24/7, and I go into it because it's very interesting to see that every once in a while. And people do get to go there, meaning if you live in Mecca, or if you live in Saudi Arabia, you can still go in, and now you got to go there and nobody's there. And as this is a holy pilgrimage, this has enormous implications that are not only about the illness themselves. So as I go back and forward, I want to add an additional one that I just added in today because it's been in the news today. I've been talking for years when I talk about the challenges of Middle East and North Africa about water issues. And in the last day, and it's again, I was looking at the BBC website before, the Ethiopians have been building over the last almost 15 years with China an enormous dam on the River Nile called the Grand Renaissance Dam. That dam is a huge point of contention for the countries who live along the River Nile. Egypt is downstream, but Egypt acts as if it owns the Nile. There are 11 countries along the River Nile, and Egypt kind of discounts them all, even though they're at the end of the River Nile in that sense. But I just mentioned 100 million Egyptians, and half of them under the age of 25. We're going to remember that one there. The water issues of the Middle East in this time of a pandemic have suddenly gone to a different way. Overwhelmingly in the Middle East and North Africa, there is huge water scarcity. And in this pandemic, one of the things we all learned is wash our hands, make sure that you're clean. 74 million Arabs that are countable, okay, in the Middle East and North Africa do not have access to that kind of water that we so take for granted to wash our hands just to try and stop the pandemic. We need to keep that also in mind when we talk about the challenges of the Middle East and North Africa in this new world. Last but not least, in that outside background, is that the leadership within the Middle East and the North Africa arena, and I go all the way out to Iran, and in the two photographs that I posted here, the upper one is that aging male dominant, no women there, leaders of Middle East and North Africa. They're the leaders there in the upper picture. It's the Arab League. It's literally from Morocco to Iraq and all of the different countries. There are 22 members states, but right now in the lower picture where you're seeing Bashar Assad in the middle, Syria was kicked out of the Arab League with the advent of everything going on in Syria. And to the right and left of the Syrian president of Bashar al-Assad, you're seeing, trying to figure out if it's to the right and to the left and how it works when it goes on the slide right now. So on one side, the older man is the Iranian supreme religious leader, Khamenei. And on the other side, the younger man, not that he's that young, is Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And I give you all of these because that's the leadership. Now, I live in a country, we can have our own challenges of leadership. We live in the UK, you can have your own challenges of leadership. You can look around the world right now and say all sorts, but it's very different. These are all, in their own ways, dictators. None of these are freely elected, let alone governed by open, equal, balanced countries. Some of them hereditary, some of them are, military coups like Egypt. We may not like to say that, but that's the way it is. And these are challenges throughout the Middle East. So I've already spoken. I spoke on half an hour. I can still take more time, right? I can talk a bit more. We have a little bit more time. Excellent. So I'm going to take you down some of the challenges of these issues that I brought up until now. I talked about demographics. I talked about religiosity. I mentioned water without going into that in depth. I'm showing right now this leadership, and I want to show you where these things have kind of come together in a very negative way for me as an Israeli from where we sit inside Israel, and that's inside the Syrian arena. Syria does not really exist as a country anymore in what we think of as a regular country. I show it on a map. It looks very clear, neat, lines. It's not neat, it's not clear, it's not nice. There has been a decade of a war going on inside Syria. It is a devastated country. It is not dysfunctional, as I'll talk about Lebanon in a moment, but it is run by warlords that right now ally themselves with Bashar Assad. And that war of the last decade, which has gone through really just incredibly horrific things. The first aspect that we don't talk about, and we should all be aware of, is that it is an incredibly horrific humanitarian disaster that none of us talk about, none of us care about, and it is, and it was, and it still is. So I'm mentioning it, and I'm not talking about it. What I probably should do is give a full lecture just about that, because I'm not doing justice at the end to people, to humanitarian. It's just a horrific disaster of what happened there on a people level. But I have to address the other implications. The first has to do with the Islamic State. Sunni, Shiite. So remember the photograph, I'm going to go back for a moment. The photograph which shows the lower one, Bashar Assad, Syrian, Arabic speaking, Alawite. Alawite is a subgroup that came out of Shiite Islam. And because I said that now very exact, and now I'm going to say that in as far as what's happening inside the Middle East right now, he is of the Shiites. To the right and left of him, those two photographs, the Iranian supreme leader, Persian speaking, and Lebanese Hezbollah Secretary General, speaks Arabic. All of the people that you're seeing in that lower picture are Shiite. All of the people that you're seeing in the upper picture, with the exception of the Iraqi prime minister, are Sunni. Only in Iraq do you have a Shiite prime minister. And I say that because one of the dividing lines of amongst others inside the greater Middle East of where we are right now has to do with that battle against the perverse, extreme, horrific aspect of Sunni Islam, which brought us the Islamic State. So wasn't it good news? As I bring you all of the maps that I steal from online all of the time, see how it was, and it expanded and it scared us, and then it shrunk. So I gotta be the one who gives you the bad news. This entire lecture, by the way, is not one that's going to leave you optimistic. That's not going to be me right now. I'm not looking at a better world. The Islamic State was never erased, contrary both to what the President of the United States said. At the most, what happened is that the territorial physicality of its presence inside Iraq and Syria was erased, which all it meant is that the people went home. And when the people went home, we got the Islamic State all over the place, because people went home to all sorts of countries after they had come to fight. We now have it all over Africa, in large portions of Asia. And I need a newer, I know this map is already a bit old, but I steal maps, I don't make them. So it takes me a lot of time until I find the right map that somebody else did that I can steal, and they haven't yet done one about this, because it's very depressing. And under the auspices of COVID-19, where, you know what, you and I will stay at home. We'll do what the National Health Service tells us to do. We'll try and act in a responsible way because we understand that that's what we need to do. And you know what? That's what most people do most of the time. But under the auspices of that, we have seen a resurgence of Islamic State attacks, not just in Africa, but in Syria, in Iraq, and it's back. It never disappeared. And one of the places where it disturbs Israel in a very specific way is the resurgence that's been happening in the Sinai Peninsula against Egyptian forces right on the other side of the border from Israel. And we hear the fighting and the challenges, and that's still going on. It hasn't disappeared. You know, sit inside your house, don't go outside, beware of the Islamic State. Hezbollah. So I said, we're talking about Syria, a decade of war. Hassan Nasrallah, you get to see him now. This photograph is literally from last Friday when he gave his last speech. He gives a speech almost every Friday. Hassan Nasrallah is the most dominant, charismatic Arabic Muslim leader in the Arabic-speaking world today. Take note of what I just said. He's Shiite, but I didn't say Shiite. I said Muslim, because he's charismatic. And he doesn't talk about Shiite. He talks about Islam. And he is bringing to the table, to the Arabic-speaking world, a charisma. And in his charisma, he is both Lebanese, and you see a little bit in the flags behind him, the Hezbollah flag, the Lebanese flag. Hezbollah right now is both a military force. They are one of the strongest military forces in the world. But right now, inside Lebanon, they have the position of being the Ministry of Health. The Minister of Health inside Lebanon right now happens to be from Hezbollah, from a Shiite, that Shiite party. So Hezbollah right now not only helped Bashar Assad not lose, and then helped Bashar Assad win. Hezbollah is at the forefront of exporting the Islamic revolution, not the Shiite revolution. That's not what they call it. The Islamic revolution worldwide. And inside Lebanon, they are giving their constituents, the ones who are theirs, the ones who work with them, the ones who believe in them, not like the mafia, like a pseudo government. They are building health clinics. They're making sure the people are out there. They're trying to find jobs. Lebanon right now is in the middle of a big collapse. But take note of this. This is where we are right now on our northern border. Iran is not only exporting weapons, precise munitions, training to all of the different Shiite forces, if they're in Syria, if they're in Iraq, or in Yemen, as examples. Iran right now is also exporting COVID-19. Can everybody see the little thing I put up there? For those who are looking, it's like if you can look at your screen. I want to talk about this for a moment because, again, it brings up my very cynical sense of humor. For this, I actually have to put my glasses on because I can't see it or read it otherwise also. So glasses, they come on as we look at it, okay? So COVID-19 starts. Miri is the one who follows the Middle East on security issues, on the demographics, okay? I look at it in a very broad security sense. And I wanted to see the COVID-19 numbers. So I said, I want to see how Israel is compared to the Arab states, okay? So I discovered, just in March, I never knew this before, that Israel does not belong to the World Health Organization, of the Eastern Mediterranean basin. Now, outside my window, I can see the Mediterranean Sea, but Israel, do not belong to EMRO, which is the Eastern Mediterranean office of WHO. So in my wicked sense of humor, at least it made me laugh, because you're looking at all those countries and you're going, where's Israel? You have to have a sense of humor, okay, always. And then I went to discover where we are, and I discovered that we're part of Europe. Okay, so just so that you should know, we exist in the World Health Organization, but they put us in Europe, okay? And the only thing I can also say is that they put Turkey in Europe too. Turkey is also not on this list here. But as you look at the numbers here, I need you just to, we all said sometimes some of us are better at technology than others. I want to be able to see this, and for some reason, it's not letting me do what I want to do right now. And I don't know why. Did I just stop the sharing? Did I manage to not stop the sharing?
No, you're still sharing. Still got
I'm
the
still
same
sharing.
chart, yeah.
I'm finding it very annoying right now. I got a new computer and I'm just not yet. It's too technological for me right now. So I can sort of see what I want to see, but I'm not seeing what I wanted to see right now.
If
Inside the
you
list itself,
you might need to stop sharing and then start sharing again with your new screen. Sometimes you have to do that.
that's a good idea. So if you guys are going to bear with me for a moment, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Hi, everybody. You can see me for a moment. And then I'm going to try and start sharing again right now. And I'm going to share it. And no, it didn't do it, but next time we'll try. It's okay. It's called New Computer. It's okay, because at least you can see it and I can see it. It's just smaller than what I'd like. But as you look itself right now at this slide that we're looking at right now, you can see very clearly Afghanistan all the way down to Yemen. There are very large numbers of cases, okay? Tens of thousands, and then you get to 264,000 cases. That's Iran. But I want you to look at a moment, sadly, at the deaths. Altogether, throughout all of the Eastern Mediterranean of the WHO countries, and again, it includes Afghanistan, includes Pakistan, it's 200 million people, very large countries. Altogether, 32,000 people dead, large number, not comparative to some of the things that have happened in Europe, because look at Iran. 13,000 out of those dead are in Iran. I mean, that's over a third. And Iran has been exporting in that sense, not just weapons, not just munitions. It's part of the spread of what's going on has been coming from there. One of the reasons that the numbers here are relatively very, very low compared to Europe when you talk about deaths and compared to the numbers is from the statistic that I told you guys all before, which is the fact that overwhelmingly all of these countries have very young populations. And until now, this illness has not, happily I should say, killed young people in the way that it's killed older people. And again, we don't know the long term of what's going to be happening there. Last things, and I'll start opening it up for questions. COVID-19 has entered into Israel, has entered into the Gaza Strip, has entered into the West Bank. And I bring you these numbers up here. They are in a surge too, just like we are inside Israel. We're very close to each other. Palestinian workers from the West Bank work in Israel right now. There is an enormous surge in the southern part of the West Bank in the Hebron area, where, as you can see there, they have thousands of cases. There are, in that sense right now, of the amount of cases and what that does, we in Israel are a first world country with a very high level of medical care. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has very decent medical care. Until a few weeks ago, there was very strong cooperation between the professionals, medical to medical, doctors to doctors. But the events of the last few weeks have changed in the impact of the proposed possible annexation. And the last thing that I just want to bring up in that sense before we go to questions is that the aspect of the annexation came up in the following way. I'll remind everybody that there have not been direct negotiations, real negotiations, between Israel and the Palestinian leadership from 2008. That's 12 years ago. Essentially, it's a decade of no negotiations. I can blame them. They will blame me. Let's be adults and say that both sides have something to do with that. Having said that, during those 12 years, one of the aspects where there's no negotiations, Israel did actions that bugged the Palestinian side. When we do those, and we did a freeze, we've done all sorts of different things over those years. They want us to be, absolutely static throughout the area as it's designated here of the West Bank or Judean area. Over the last few years, the Palestinians have done have taken decisions and have done a series of one-sided decisions, both at the United Nations and in membership in the United Nations and in other international organizations that have bugged Israel. I give you that as the background because the proposed annexation as it came up was part of Israel's year of, there's the year of living dangerously. We had our year of elections when we had elections in April and then elections in September and then elections in March. And within those 11 months, one of the aspects that came up towards the last elections by the Israeli Prime Minister was the idea that as a result of what I showed you before, the Trump peace plan, which I can try and bring back in a moment to show that map, that in that peace plan, the area that you're seeing now on the map is designated to be part of Israel. And so the Prime Minister took that and said, okay, in the Trump plan, which we accept, this is designated to be part of Israel. We can go forward, take a step, and apply Israeli law to this area of the Jordan Valley, which in any case is going to be in the future under the peace Trump plan, part of Israel. I'm not going to go in right now to the fact if it's controversial or not controversial. I will say otherwise. There are different opinions about would it happen in any case. Israel accepted the Trump peace plan in general. The Palestinian leadership, every single one of the Arab states around us, including Egypt and Jordan that have peace treaties with us, absolutely rejected the Trump peace plan. And into all of that, we had these elections and the idea of applying Israeli law to the portion of the Jordan Valley. So I spoke about a lot of different aspects because the proposed Jordan Valley annexation has had an indirect impact also on COVID-19. In what way? When the government was put together in May, one of the basic elements of the government was that they would be able to start talking about applying Israeli law, passing it as a law in the parliament in Knesset from July 1st. And that statement became July 1st annexation. The Knesset did not apply it. It has not yet come up in the Knesset, but the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and all of the areas A and B that they work in have stopped the security coordination with Israel. They've told them to stop all coordination. Some things go on, but nowadays it's pretty much based on professional to professional. It's not done in coordination, and it makes it very challenging. And over the last few weeks, we have seen several different aspects where Arab states have sent supplies to the West Bank. They flew them into Ben Gurion Airport. The Palestinians refused to accept it. There is no coordination. We're talking both about medical supplies, certainly when it comes to I always forget the name, the inhalators, that name, I probably said that wrong, and inhalers, maybe that's the word. And it continues in that sense where when you have these kinds of things, when you do the lockdown, you want to be coordinated. We live interconnected. Tens of thousands of Palestinians work in Israel. And I give all of that as part of the challenge right now on the spread of the disease within the West Bank. So I spoke about a variety of different things. I leave you with the thought that it's July 2020, and all I tried to do was to open up all sorts of different challenges. I fully recognize that I didn't give you easy answers or happy scenarios. We're not at that stage as far as I'm concerned. But we're all looking forward in that sense towards stabilizing both inside Israel, anywhere in the world, and in the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. We want that to stabilize, but right now, most of the focus is on trying to handle the economic ramifications of the illness. Man, did I talk more than I expected. I apologize, but that's what happens to me. I will stop sharing, and we're at the stage where we can have questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Marie. Okay. If everyone wants to type their messages in the questions into the chat, we have a first question from Rebecca Lewis. What will need to happen in order for things to improve, Marie?
It's a wonderful question, Rebecca, and I'm going to give a hard answer that's not just about the Middle East and North Africa. Things are going to get worse before they get better. And I say that because the economy, at the end, all of us want to have a job, want to be able to eat. And what happened in the Middle East and North Africa is that enormous youth was just at the stage where all of these countries were leaving poverty behind them. We're leaving the challenges of not being able to find a job. It was like it was getting better. And this is going to take everything backwards. And again, it's not true just in the Middle East and North Africa, but in these countries, if they don't have additional income of some sort, some of these countries have oil income. Yay, oil prices went down. Oil, gas, other resources. Some of the countries don't even have that. And they need to diversify in any way. So what would I say? They need government investment to create the jobs, to make the platforms. There's no question that the Gulf countries are doing that. They have more income. They're investing more in their people. But Egypt needs somebody else to help them out. They're being helped out a bit right now by Saudi Arabia. The big issues right now is that Iran has an income. We're all under the impression, sanctions, the United States, I'm like sanctions, schmanctions. They sell their oil. There are countries that are willing to buy the oil from Iran. Iran takes that oil money, even if the oil price went down, but they still get an oil income. And because China's willing to buy oil, you don't really need anybody else except for that. And takes that money, and Iran actually used to invest quite a bit in its own country. And they are having enormous protests because they're not investing in that enormous, 42 million population under the age of 25. So yes, they need to do so. They're not doing so. And right now that is just, it's a very negative spiral. And I'll remind you of what happened 10 years ago in the Middle East. And we could be in for a second roll of enormous protests that immediately will become violence.
That actually leads to a question that I had. There are more questions coming through, but I'm going to throw mine in because of that comment. If the Middle East demographic, as you said earlier, is very young and is also very literate, do you think there could be another Arab Spring just around the corner?
It's a lovely question, and I'm going to immediately say I'm Israeli. We actually never called it a spring. We were very overt about the fact that, and now I'm going to be very Israeli again in that sense of how I answer. I need to remind all of you guys, because you guys don't know me in that sense, that I have a very strong American accent. I was born in the States, but I've lived in Israel for 50 years. So my sense of humor is probably more British than anything else, but I'm very, very cynical. And I say that because I'm going to be answering right now in a very cynical way. I feel that Miri, I can't represent any of the people who I'm talking to right now or anybody who's watching on Facebook, but I look at the world through white, Western, liberal eyes. The Middle East, and I'm saying something very harsh right now, okay, is not white, is not liberal, is not Western. And they look at the world from a different viewpoint. When I look at them through my eyes, and I see it as an Arab Spring, they're going out and asking for democracy. I am projecting my view of the world onto them. But what did I say at the beginning? This enormous youth wants to invent its own future. It wants to invent its own ideas. It doesn't mean that they're against freedom, representation, but they don't want to use our words. They don't want to take that Judeo-Greek Christian kind of trajectory and use it as their own. And they want to invent their own type of governance that works for them, something that works within Islamic culture, the Islamic world, something that works. And I want to remind you that the Islamic world did not go through a reformation. And I, as a woman, can say that the woman's status there, not a Grace Metzia. Having said that, Bangladesh has had more than one woman Muslim leader. India, that's something else. Pakistan, I mean, you can be a Muslim country that has a woman leader. It isn't against that per se. So my answer in that sense is that I think that they're going to try and invent their own. What scares me, the first thing they invented as their own that we all saw was the Islamic State. What could be a worse example of what they invented? But, and I'm not saying, yay, you know, that's a good invention. I follow closely what's happening in Tunisia. Tunis is a country of 10 million people, very literate, very strong representation of women, with a desire to have, if you would say, a Christian culture or a Jewish culture, which I take for granted here in Israel, a Jewish culture. And you guys live in the UK, it's an Anglican culture, not necessarily a Jewish culture. And that doesn't mean in the religious sense that everybody does something religious. They want an Islamic culture, and that's not going to be the same trajectory. So I don't expect an Arab Spring. I do expect uprisings. I do expect that there will be yet again some of the dictators that will be kicked out and killed, and perhaps it'll be horrific. By the way, that's still going on. Libya is a horrific civil war right now. Yemen is a horrific civil war right now. It hasn't ended. Iraq is semi-stabilized. Syria, jury's out. It's very harsh. So, but I expect in other places that it will change, both in places and follow like little countries like Tunis and some of the Gulf countries. The Gulf countries, though, have a very distinct advantage that they have money. Sometimes it's easier to do those sort of things when you have money.
Okay, thank you. Great. A question from Ben Salon. Was there ever a time where you think Israel could have been happy with their neighbors?
It's a wonderful question. You don't get to choose your neighbors. Now it's a question of how we live within the Middle Eastern arena that we are part of. I'm talking to you guys with this very distinct American accent. I am through and through Israeli, even though I speak English with an American accent. And I say that because Israelis overwhelmingly are not Western English speaking. We're not, part of the Commonwealth. We're not the 51st state of the United States, and we're not part of the 53 countries of the British Commonwealth. We are Middle Eastern and Western at the same time. And I say that because half of the population of the state of Israel have a very strong connection to the Middle East that we live in. Jews that came out of many of these countries where they have a culture inside their house, which can be an Arabic speaking culture, can do with the music, with food, with all sorts of different things. So there's no impediment to our having a stronger relationship at a cultural, civic level. Then there's geopolitics. I do not think, Ben, and I say this from the heart, that any of the Arabic speaking countries will ever accept us in the way that we'd like, in the sense that they'll recognize that we have this Jewish connection and Jewish right to be here. They're not going to, but they do accept us as being here. Some of the Gulf countries, again, are not harping as much on the Palestinian issue. It's out there. But so when I say acceptance, we have a peace treaty with Egypt and Jordan, and I would say that the average Egyptian and Jordanian can't stand the existence of the state of Israel. So the question is where we are. They think that we want to swallow them up. Our economy, Ben, is all of the economies from Morocco all the way through Iraq will equal our GDP, and that includes Saudi Arabia, the oil producing country. We're part of the OECD countries. Again, this is all pre-COVID-19, but everybody's going down the hill. So the question is how we can be part of it. I had hoped that this pandemic might bring out some of the more positive aspects. Everybody's aware of Israel as a forefront of medical research, of technological research, of the combination of the both. You want that to be part of where we are right now in the world. And again, with the Gulf countries, it's brought out a more positive aspect. And with the other countries, it has only brought up higher walls and more distinct challenges. I know I meandered, but that's the best I could do right now.
Okay, there's two more questions. This is from Barry Price. Lebanon appears to be falling apart economically. What impact will this have on Nasrallah's regime? And is he likely to send some of his missiles towards Israel, or is the pandemic holding him back?
It's a wonderful question, comment, Barry, and it's so pertinent right now. And I think that you asked the question, and it's what we call the $64,000 question. Is Nasrallah more Lebanese, or is he more the export of the Islamic regime to the world? Does he feel responsible to his fellow Lebanese, or does he feel more responsible to the export of the Islamic ideas to the world? And I don't have an answer. I know that they have hundreds of thousands of missiles. Those missiles were supplied by Iran. And I don't know that Hezbollah right now would use those missiles on behalf of Hezbollah because of Lebanon without Iran. Those are there for Iran and not necessarily for Hezbollah. But having said all of that, I am worried about it. I am worried about the economic implosion of the country Lebanon. It was a financial center. It was a banking center. That financial center has collapsed. The banks shut their doors. People want to take out their money. The banks shut their doors. And Hassan Nasrallah gave a lecture, a sermon last week saying, okay, we shouldn't be finance anymore, because that is, of course, what the Christians did. They're not the Shiite Muslims. We shouldn't be a finance center. Lebanese should go back to agriculture. And in his own way, he was talking to perhaps his Shiite base. But in general, Lebanese are not an agricultural country that want to go back and sow the land. So I do not see it right now. I wonder myself how much he's in contact with that base. I think that he very strongly represents his Shiite base inside Lebanon. But then there's the other 50 to 60% of Lebanese. So who knows?
Okay.
We're going to be going on and into last question. It's like
this is the last
late
question.
here.
This is from Stephanie and Howard Class. Should Israel be concerned about the UAE space program?
What a wonderful question, Stephanie. No, I don't think so. I think that space programs are something that are good for the world. And in that sense, when you look at that, there's a difference between, and I'm going to go so far and I'm going to surprise everybody here. And I'm going to say I am not at all challenged by the fact that Iran has very advanced technological programs. Those are good things, okay? The technology in that sense is something where the more educated you have people, that's something that usually brings out better aspects. The UAE's space program is a small one. It's a lovely one. It's much more similar to what was done off the hand in Israel, where it wasn't successful at the end, but that idea of having a program out there only advances Arab pride, and something that, again, I want for that enormous demographic of Arab youth, Arabic speaking from Morocco through Iraq, looking at the UAE, because I'll just add in, when they ask the enormous youth of the Arab world what they want to be like, and I said before, they say that they don't want to be like Russia, certainly not the United States, they don't want to be like the UK or France. They all say that the model of the country that they'd like to be like is UAE. So that for me, it's a country where people are educated, where they have very a strong economic base. Yet they have income. It makes it a lot easier. But I think that it's a good example, and they need Arabic-speaking examples of their own governance, of what they can do, and not looking around and constantly fearing that everybody else is overwhelming them. I know that that scares us, but that's where I need to take a deep breath. I think it's a lot better looking at a UAE putting a spaceship out into the sky than having the youth inventing another Islamic state. And if you look at it in those ways, I think that it's not as scary.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, again, thank you so much for that insightful talk, Miri. The responses on the chat clearly show that you've created a great deal of discussion within our community, which is obviously the aim of the series. So thank you once again for your education and your update, and we appreciate your time, bearing in mind that you're also 2 hours ahead. Thank you also to everyone for joining us this evening. This event has been recorded and will be available to view again on the Hale Shule website. Please see on your screen details now. I'm going to share those. Okay, so I am now sharing the screen.
Hey, even I managed to share screen today.
Okay, right. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we've coming up on this Sunday, we've got a continuation of the World Series talks. We're very excited to be showing a tour with Rabbi Natan Sriskin. He's giving us a live tour of the Biblical Zoological Museum in Jerusalem. That's at 3 o'clock, and that's this Sunday afternoon. This is on the museum's Zoom account as well, not Hale Shule's, so please look out for the new meeting room ID and the password, which is on the poster. Following that talk, over the rest of July, we've got more talks, including more political analysis from leading world experts, and a wonderful discussion on the family history of Guardian journalist Hadley Freeman, who will be talking next Thursday night at about 8:15 p.m. about her book, House of Glass. Once again, Natan's tour begins at 3 p.m. this coming Sunday afternoon, so please look out for the e-posters on social media and from the Shul newsletter, and we very much look forward to welcoming you all back next week. Have a safe week and good night. Thank you very much.
לילה טוב מישראל לכולם. להתראות.
תודה רבה. Okay, לילה טוב.